If you've ever faced a challenge so overwhelming that it felt impossible to overcome, you're not alone. We all encounter Goliaths in life, obstacles that seem too big, too powerful, and too intimidating to defeat. It could be financial struggles, health concerns, broken relationships, or personal doubts. Whatever your Goliath may be, there's hope. And the story of David and Goliath in 1 Samuel 17 offers us powerful insights on how to face these giants with courage and faith. In 1 Samuel 17, Israel's army was paralyzed by fear as the Philistine giant Goliath taunted them day after day. No one dared to challenge him. Then came David, a young shepherd boy, armed not with a sword or armor but with faith in God. David's courage wasn't based on his own strength. It was grounded in his trust that God would deliver him. David's victory wasn't accidental. He was prepared. As a shepherd, David had faced lions and bears while protecting his flock. Those moments of unseen struggle became his training ground. David told King Saul, "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." David's confidence came from past victories, reminding us that God's faithfulness before is proof of his faithfulness now. When David approached Goliath, he rejected the heavy armor offered by Saul and chose what he knew, a sling and 5 smooth stones. This teaches us that we don't need to rely on what the world offers to win our battles. Instead, we can trust what God has equipped us with. David knew that victory wasn't about impressive armor or outward strength, but about God's power working through him. As Goliath mocked him, David boldly declared, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands." David's words reveal the heart of his faith. He knew the battle belonged to God. So how can we face our own Goliaths? First, remember God's faithfulness. Reflect on past victories and answered prayers. When you recall how God has guided you before, your faith will grow stronger for the battles you face today. Second, use what God has equipped you with. Just like David chose his sling and stones, God has given you unique skills, experiences, and spiritual tools. Maybe it's a heart for prayer, a gift of encouragement, or wisdom from past hardships. Trust that what God has placed in your hands is enough when paired with his power. Third, speak with faith. David didn't just believe silently. He declared his confidence in God's power out loud. When we speak words of faith over our situations, we invite God's presence into our battles and silence the voice of fear. Finally, trust that the battle belongs to God. David knew that victory didn't depend on his size or strength, but on God's power. The same is true for you. When you surrender your fight to God, you invite him to do what only he can do. Whatever Goliath you're facing today, whether it's anxiety, addiction, fear, or uncertainty, remember that you are not fighting alone. Just as God empowered David, he is with you now. Trust in his strength, stand firm in his promises, and believe that victory is possible through him. Take a moment right now to reflect. What Goliath are you facing? Ask God for the courage to stand firm, the wisdom to use what he's given you, and the faith to trust him with the outcome. Because when you put your battles in God's hands, you can walk forward with confidence, knowing that he will fight for you. Picture this scene. The mighty Philistine army gathered on one hill and Israel's army on the other, with a valley between them. Out from the Philistine camp stepped Goliath, a giant of a man covered in bronze armor from head to toe. He carried a massive spear and boomed his challenge across the valley. "Choose a man to fight me. If he wins, we'll be your servants, but if I win, you'll be ours." 1 Samuel 17 verse 8 and 9. For 40 days Goliath repeated this challenge, and with each passing day, Israel's courage crumbled. The sight of Goliath left Israel's army frozen in fear. Even King Saul, the tallest and most powerful among them, felt powerless. The men of Israel whispered to one another about Goliath's size, his strength, and his undefeated record. They forgot that their God was greater than any warrior. Instead of trusting in God's power, they focused only on what they could see. And Goliath seemed unbeatable. This is a picture many of us can relate to. We face giants in our own lives, overwhelming circumstances that seem impossible to overcome. It could be a health crisis, financial struggle, relationship breakdown, or a burden of anxiety and fear. Like Israel, we may feel powerless, but God offers us a different perspective. Just as Goliath was no match for God's power, our challenges are never too big for Him to handle. In the next part, we'll explore how God raised up an unlikely hero, a young shepherd boy named David, to face this terrifying giant. David's story reminds us that victory doesn't depend on size or strength, but on faith in the one true God who fights for us. David was not a seasoned warrior like his brothers. He was a young shepherd boy, seemingly insignificant in the eyes of many. Yet, what David lacked in physical strength or battle experience, he made up for in faith and devotion. He spent his days tending sheep, a humble task that seemed far removed from the battlefield. But God often chooses the unlikely to accomplish the extraordinary. David's heart for God, shaped in those quiet moments, was the foundation for his courage. While David's time as a shepherd may have seemed ordinary, it was actually a season of preparation. In the wilderness, David faced real dangers. When a lion came to attack his flock, David relied not on his own strength, but on God's power to strike it down. When a bear threatened his sheep, David once again stepped in and defeated it. Each of these encounters strengthened David's faith and prepared him for something greater. He learned to trust God in private before standing for Him in public. This reveals an important truth. God often trains us in hidden places before calling us to public challenges. The struggles you face when no one is watching are not wasted. God uses those moments to shape your character, deepen your faith, and prepare you for what lies ahead. Like David, you may not see the full picture yet, but trust that God is building strength within you. The quiet victories you win today are preparing you for greater victories tomorrow. When David stepped onto the battlefield, he brought more than just a sling and stones. He carried unwavering faith in God. While King Saul offered David his armor, David refused it. Why? Because David knew his strength didn't come from human weapons or tactics. It came from trusting God completely. David's confidence wasn't arrogance, it was assurance rooted in God's past faithfulness. He remembered the lion and the bear he had defeated while guarding his father's sheep. Those victories weren't just moments of survival. They were lessons in trusting God's power. David understood that the same God who delivered him in those moments would deliver him again. Standing before Goliath, David declared boldly in 1 Samuel 17 verse 47, "The battle is the Lord's." That statement reveals David's mindset. He knew the outcome didn't depend on his own strength, but on God's power. While others trembled before Goliath's size and weaponry, David believed in a power far greater than any human force. David's choice to rely on his sling and stones may have seemed foolish to others, but it reflected his trust in God's ability to work through what seemed weak and insignificant. In doing so, David demonstrated a vital truth. Victory doesn't come from relying on what the world considers powerful. It comes from depending on God's strength. For us today, David's boldness challenges us to trust God in our own battles. There are moments when we feel unprepared, overwhelmed, or inadequate. In those times, God asks us not to rely on worldly strategies alone, but to step forward in faith, trusting that He will fight for us. When we declare, "The battle is the Lord's," we're surrendering control and inviting God's power to work through us. Are there challenges in your life that feel too big to face? Remember David's example. trust God's power over human strength and believe that He is able to bring victory through even the simplest tools in your hands. Today, we're stepping into one of the most powerful moments in the Bible, the incredible showdown between David and Goliath. This isn't just a story about bravery, it's a vivid reminder of how God amplifies our efforts when we trust Him fully. Imagine this scene. Goliath, a towering giant, armored from head to toe, stands taunting Israel's army. Day after day, he challenges them, and no one dares to step forward. But then, David appears, a young shepherd boy with no armor, no sword, just a sling and 5 smooth stones. When David steps forward, Goliath mocks him, calling him nothing more than a boy with sticks. But David doesn't flinch. Instead, he boldly declares, "You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. The battle is the Lord's, and He will give you into our hands." 1 Samuel 17 verse 45 and 47. With unwavering faith, David places a stone in his sling, swings it, and releases it with precision. The stone strikes Goliath in the forehead, a single blow, and the mighty warrior collapses face down. Victory is achieved not through brute strength, but by God's power, working through David's obedience and courage. David's victory wasn't luck. It wasn't just skill. It was the result of God amplifying David's small effort because David acted in faith. This moment reminds us that when we step out in obedience, trusting God, He takes our seemingly small actions and turns them into something powerful. We often face Goliaths, overwhelming challenges that seem too big to overcome. It might be a financial crisis, a broken relationship, or a struggle with anxiety or fear. Like David, we may feel underprepared or too small to face the problem, but victory doesn't depend on our strength alone. It's about placing our trust in God's power. So, what steps can you take when you're facing a giant in your life? Acknowledge the battle is the Lord's. Remind yourself that God is with you and working through you. Take a step of faith. David didn't just believe God could defeat Goliath. He acted on that belief. Even small steps of obedience invite God to move in powerful ways. Trust that God will amplify your efforts. David's stone was just a small tool, but in God's hands, it became a powerful weapon. No challenge is too great when you place your confidence in God's strength. The same God who guided David's stone to victory is the God who walks with you today. So what Goliath are you facing? Ask God for courage, step forward in faith, and watch Him take your small efforts and turn them into something extraordinary. We all face giants in life, overwhelming challenges that seem impossible to overcome. But David's victory over Goliath offers powerful spiritual lessons that still apply today. First lesson is courage through faith. David's courage wasn't rooted in his skill, but in his faith. When Goliath mocked him, David responded with confidence. The battle is the Lord's. 1 Samuel 17 verse 47. David knew that no enemy was greater than his God. When fear looms large in our lives, we can draw courage from the same truth. Faith reminds us that God is bigger than our circumstances. Whether you're battling anxiety, financial struggles, or broken relationships, courage is found in trusting God's power, not your own. Courage doesn't mean you won't feel afraid. It means you choose to move forward in faith despite that fear. Second lesson is preparation matters. David's victory wasn't spontaneous. He had prepared long before this moment. While tending his father's sheep, David faced lions and bears. Each of those unseen victories built his confidence and skill. When the time came to face Goliath, David didn't panic. He relied on what God had already trained him to do. In the same way, spiritual preparation equips us to stand strong in difficult moments. Daily practices like prayer, studying scripture, and worship strengthen our faith. When we consistently connect with God, we're building a foundation that holds firm when life throws its biggest challenges our way. Think of spiritual preparation as sharpening your sword before the battle begins. It's the quiet moments with God that prepare you to stand boldly when trouble arises. Third one is God uses the unlikely. David wasn't the obvious choice to fight Goliath. He wasn't a warrior, he was a young shepherd. But that didn't matter to God. He often chooses the unlikely to accomplish the impossible. Maybe you've felt overlooked or unqualified. Maybe you think you're too young, too old, too inexperienced, or too ordinary. But remember, God specializes in using unlikely people to fulfill his plans. David's story shows us that what matters most isn't your background. It's your willingness to trust and obey God. If you feel insignificant, know this: God can use you exactly where you are. Your obedience, no matter how small it seems, can lead to incredible victories. The last lesson would be, speak to your giants. One of the most powerful moments in David's battle was when he declared victory before the fight had even begun. In 1 Samuel 17, verse 45 and 47, David boldly proclaimed that God would deliver Goliath into his hands. His words reflected his unwavering faith in God's power. What we speak matters. Words of faith shape our mindset and invite God's power into our situation. Instead of speaking words of fear or defeat, declare God's promises. Speak life over your struggles. Proclaim victory even when the odds seem stacked against you. For example, if you're facing anxiety, declare, God has not given me a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. 2 Timothy 1 verse 7. If you're battling discouragement, say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Philippians 4 verse 13. Your words can either reinforce fear or build faith, so speak God's truth over your life. David's victory over Goliath wasn't just about a shepherd defeating a giant. It was a picture of what happens when we place our trust in God. Courage through faith, daily preparation, embracing your role as God's chosen vessel, and boldly declaring victory are keys to overcoming the giants in your own life. Whatever challenge you're facing today, remember this: the same God who empowered David stands ready to empower you. Step forward with courage, prepare in the quiet places, trust that God can use you, and declare his victory over every giant you face. Every one of us faces a Goliath at some point in life. It may not be a giant soldier standing on a battlefield, but the challenge can feel just as intimidating. Your Goliath could be fear, addiction, doubt, financial struggles, or a broken relationship. Whatever it may be, know this: God has equipped you to overcome it, just as he equipped David. The first step in conquering your Goliath is to identify it. Be honest with yourself. What is the challenge that looms largest in your life right now? Is it anxiety that keeps you awake at night? Is it the feeling of being overwhelmed by financial pressure? Perhaps it's a habit you can't seem to break. Naming your Goliath is crucial because you cannot defeat what you refuse to acknowledge. Once you identify your challenge, equip yourself with powerful spiritual strategies. Number 1, commit to prayer strategies. Just as David called upon God's power, so must we. Prayer is not a last resort, it is your greatest weapon. Develop a strategy of prayer that targets your specific struggle. If fear is your Goliath, pray for courage daily. If you're battling financial stress, pray for wisdom in stewardship and trust in God's provision. Be intentional and persistent, remembering that God hears and answers. Number 2, surround yourself with godly counsel. David may have stood alone in front of Goliath, but he was never truly alone. He had a community that believed in him, including the support of his family, his king, and ultimately his faith in God. In the same way, surround yourself with people who will encourage you in your faith. Seek out trusted mentors, spiritual leaders, and friends who will point you to God's promises when your courage starts to falter. Lastly, declare scripture over your situation. David didn't just believe in God's power, he spoke of victory before the battle began. In 1 Samuel 17 verse 47, David boldly declared, "The battle is the Lord's." Likewise, you can speak God's word over your circumstances. If you're struggling with fear, declare 2 Timothy 1 verse 7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. If doubt is your Goliath, proclaim James 1 verse 6. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt. Your words have power, so use them to align your heart with God's promises. Remember, David's victory wasn't about his own strength. It was about his trust in God's power. In the same way, you may feel weak or unprepared, but God is ready to work through you. The courage to step onto the battlefield comes from knowing that the outcome doesn't depend on you alone. God is fighting for you. So what is your Goliath? What challenge seems too big to face? Identify it. Bring it before God in prayer. Surround yourself with godly voices and boldly declare victory, trusting that God's power is greater than anything that stands against you. The same God who empowered David to defeat Goliath is the God who stands with you today. Step forward in faith, knowing that victory is already written in His plan for your life. As we come to the end of this video, I want to leave you with this thought. No matter what Goliath you're facing right now, you are not alone. Fear, doubt, addiction, financial struggles, these giants may seem overwhelming, but they are not bigger than God. David stood before Goliath not with armor or a sword, but with faith. Faith that God would deliver him. That same God is with you today. He sees your struggles. He knows your fears. And just as He empowered David, He will empower you. But here's the key. You must take that step of faith. David didn't just believe, he acted. He ran toward the battlefield with boldness, declaring victory even before the stone left his sling. That same boldness can be yours when you put your trust fully in God. The same God who empowered David to defeat Goliath is the God who stands with you today. Step forward in faith, knowing that victory is already written in His plan for your life. As we come to the end of this video, I want to leave you with this thought. No matter what Goliath you're facing right now, you are not alone. Fear, doubt, addiction, financial struggles, these giants may seem overwhelming, but they are not bigger than God. David stood before Goliath, not with armor or a sword, but with faith that God would deliver him. That same God is with you today. He sees your struggles. He knows your fears. And just as He empowered David, He will empower you. But here's the key. You must take that step of faith. David didn't just believe, he acted. He ran toward the battlefield with boldness, declaring victory even before the stone left his sling. That same boldness can be yours when you put your trust fully in God.